Welcome to EWA's FIN-LYT podcast. EWA is a fee-only RIA based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We hope all listeners of this podcast will benefit as we deep dive into complex financial topics that we will make simplified for you. And we hope that this really serves as a catalyst so that you can make the best financial planning decisions for your family and also save time. Welcome, everybody, to FIN-LYT by EWA podcast. This week, we are talking about 5 misconceptions around financial planning topics. We're going to dive deep into those. I'm joined here with Jamison Smith today. So Jamison, what's the first misconception that we see on a daily basis with new potential clients or just out there in the media?
First one we're going to look at is buying versus renting. We'll spend some time on housing. It's a huge, hot topic. People get really passionate and opinionated about this one way or the other, which is interesting. But we've analyzed this hundreds of times, the math behind the situation. Ultimately, it's a lifestyle decision, though. But let's dive into houses. So what are some things, Matt, that you've seen with clients that influence this decision?
Yes, I think, it has to be. We'll put a lot of resources out there in this one as well. So purely from a math standpoint, there's, if you just look up statistics of how often people move, I want to say it's over 7 times a year that someone moves.
7 times a year? 7 times in a lifetime?
7 times in a lifetime. Yeah, not in the year. 7 times in a lifetime. So let's just use a $500,000 home as an example. Generally speaking, there's like a 6% transaction fee every time you do that, right? So that's 30,000 times 7. That's $210,000 in fees if you were to buy every single home. That's just one consideration. The second consideration is that there are a lot of phantom costs for the house, such as the biggest one most people don't think about is home maintenance. Mm-hmm. There's taxes, there's insurance, there's taxes, there's insurance, and then there's also the interest on the loan you take out as well. But let's just say hypothetically that someone takes out a $3,500 a month, $3,500 a month mortgage. Just say that's around a $500,000 home, right? And so, and then let's say that I do that, and then let's say you rent for $3,500 a month. Okay, so no difference in cost. So just to the general public, they would say, well, Jamison is flushing money down because that rent is just going away. But in reality, if we look at, let's assume my $3,500 a month is all inclusive of my mortgage payment, which includes principal and interest, my taxes, and my insurance. The home cost, you generally have to look at your home value, 2% of the home value to minimum is going to be spent. That's $10,000 a year. If I have to replace a roof, my AC goes out, my HVAC, my landscaping, whatever that maintenance is. And so if we just take $1,000 a month and you, by renting, you don't have home maintenance. If you take that $1,000 a month and invest it, or even stick it into savings, that's $60,000 in 5 years. Let's say in 5 years I sell. When you look at the equity I have established in my house, minus the closing cost, assuming you've invested that at a return of 7%, you're going to be way ahead. And then if we do that analysis in 10, 20, 30 years, you're actually always going to be ahead. So what most people look at is they just look at the rent versus the mortgage, but the phantom costs are what really get you. So that I am a big believer in owning a home, don't get me wrong, but what we want to correct from a misconception standpoint in this podcast is that it's not. Most people justify a big purchase. They justify, upkeeping it. They justify a huge renovation saying it's an investment. And sure, there is some value, but it is not an investment. An investment should grow with past inflation in a home. Generally speaking, there's certain hot pockets in the United States that we're talking specifically that will, get double-digit returns. But consistently over time, we're looking at real estate, personal owned real estate under 4% a year. So the misconception here is that we're not saying it's better to rent or better to buy. The two things we want to point out is for renters, you should not feel bad about renting. As long as you're disciplined in saving the difference of what you would have spent in, those phantom cost, you're in good shape and you'll have flexibility. If you need to get up and move, you can move. If you want to, stay in the city but go to a different place, you have that flexibility. In a house, you're really stuck because of those back end transaction costs and those phantom costs. So if you're going to own, but make sure the time frame is right. Making sure you're doing it for your family, your lifestyle, because you want to. Not as a justification process because you think it's a good financial decision. So both are good decisions because everyone needs a place to live. But the misconception here is that homeownership is so much better than renting. It may be so much better than renting from a lifestyle perspective because you have control. It may be worse from a lifestyle perspective because you have all this stuff, responsibilities on your back. That depends on the individual. But education here is key so people know what they're getting into either way.
Yeah. I think a couple of things to add. I've heard, number one, I agree with all of that, but I've heard people say like everybody should own a home. And I'm like, okay, I mean, that's really the misconception. Like if everybody should own a home, it's just a ridiculous statement to make. It's so situational. And again, from a financial standpoint, there's usually a 7-year break even, most cases, where you have to live in the house for 7 years to break even. And if you're going to move before that, you're probably going to lose out with the commissions for the house sale, the upkeep, taxes, etc. Second thing is with the upkeep, I've heard all the time, well, I'll just build a brand new house and I won't have to do maintenance. And it's like, okay, well, maybe for the first couple years, but if you were to look like a brand new house now, 10 years from now, you may put $50,000, $100,000 into a roof. If you were to like amortize that out the course of time you're in the house, that's where that $10,000 a year makes sense because it may not all happen every single year, but it may be these huge purchases, every 5 years or so on. And the second thing with renting, another thing with renting is just the peace of mind that it provides a lot of people, being able to move, like you said, and just not having to worry about the upkeep. And one other thing I want to note that I think people get caught up on is like, I guess this is probably like, you just look back in history, like the American dream, like what is it, 1950s, 1960s, like it's like you buy a house and that's like the definition of success, which I think is a huge misconception. And that's why a lot of people feel this like pressure to get out of school, get a job and like buy a house, which like realistically it could be one of the worst financial decisions you make if you buy it when you're young, you move, you end up losing money on it, you have no idea what you're getting into. So I think there's just a lot of societal pressure and things that people think makes them successful around owning a house, which is totally a misconception.
Yeah, no question. And just to use my personal self as an example, I rented the first 10 years of my career. And had I not done that, so the first one was like ridiculous. I mean, this was like, I don't know, 13, 14 years ago, but like it was $500 a month. And it was like one of 4 units in a house on Mount Washington. It was not ideal, we'll put it that way. But it was ideal for the budget, but it was not an ideal living situation. But that allowed me to quit my job at a Big Four accounting firm and go to a broker dealer and start this company from scratch where, I didn't know where my first paycheck was coming from. It was kind of like you eat what you kill model. It was. You had to get your own clients from scratch. And if I had owned a home at that point, because I could have afforded it with the salary job I have, I wouldn't have been able to leave that job. And we wouldn't be sitting here today. Literally, if I would have bought a home. So that buying a home just impacts so much other areas of your life. And so then if we look at the other stages of life, how I was able to reinvest because I kept that rent low. And now that I do own a home, I just laugh at myself because it's like we're doing some like landscaping in the front yard. Just the rocks alone, I'm like, if I would have just taken the money I'm spending on these white rocks and put it in my Roth IRA, like renting is so much better from a financial perspective. Now I'm happy because it's our place. Yeah. It's my daughter's, growing up there, et cetera. The dogs have a fence in the backyard. So don't get me wrong, there's many conveniences, but just like the coordination of like the people that have to come in and out to like fix stuff, like the boiler is shot yesterday, garbage disposal went out, and like my time just coordinating those calls. I mean, if you look at the individual, I mean, it's just ridiculous from a financial perspective how much I think renting is better than buying. And I'm just going to prove that for a second. So let's just assume, for example, I don't, because I own a home now, just get that, so on very unbiased advice, $1,000 a month investment over 30 years. Like if you decide to rent Jamison for the next 30 years, If you just invest that in like a Roth 401k, so it's all tax free in the back end, 7% return, you're gonna have $1.22 million on the back end.
What is that investing? Just maxing out a Roth 401k?
That's just $1,000 a month.
$1,000 a month.
Yeah. So I'm just using the same example, like $500,000 home, you rent. Now, let's say that you don't rent, because in Pittsburgh, I mean, you can get it's hard to even find a place that would cost $3,500 a month. I'm just talking about like other areas where the rent would be similar to mortgage. But in Pittsburgh, like rent is cheap, right?
Yeah.
Like what do you pay under $2,000 a month right now for rent?
It's like $2,000 all in with
all in.
parking.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just say hypothetically that you were to invest the difference, so $1,500. Because if you were to buy a similar place to what you have now, it would be like a $500,000 condo, and you would be paying $3,500 a month all in instead of
probably
$2,000.
even more. I looked at it actually. Yeah, it's probably yeah, whatever. Doesn't matter.
Just let me keep. I already have this math done,
okay.
so let's just say it's lower. So you're investing now. You're renting for $2,000 versus if you own a condo for $3,500 a month. That's a $1,500 a month difference in payment. Plus, you don't have maintenance. So let's just say you're able to invest $2,500 a month if you difference over the next 30. Now your rent would go up. So this math isn't perfect, but your maintenance would go up with inflation. But just to prove a point here, I mean, you invest $2,500 a month for 30 years as a renter because you don't have any of these surprises and maintenance and phantom cost. You have $3 million.
Yeah.
So sure, that $500,000 house may be worth. Well, let's just do the math.
$1 million? No, maybe
Yeah,
not
so
close to $3 million.
Not even close. So $500,000 home that you own outright in 30 years, 3% growth rate, it would be worth $1.22 million.
Yeah.
4% growth rate, it would be worth $1.65 million.
I hear all the time people are like, oh, real estate outperforms equities. Like, no, it doesn't. If you were to buy in Austin, Texas, like 10 years ago, sure, but like you really would have to find the right area.
It's just math. I mean, the data's out there. If you look at the last 50 years, and we're talking about long-term stock market returns are 9.2% in the S&P 500. We use 7. Long-term real estate returns are under 4%. I'm talking personal real estate, not commercial. I'm not talking about I'm talking personal residence. You're not renting it out. That's a whole different discussion. We already did a podcast on that. So, okay. So let's move on from that. Any closing thoughts on the buying versus renting?
A couple more things. So like I rent right now, and I get asked a question all the time, like, oh, like what you're just flushing.
Aren't you a financial advisor?
Yeah. Why aren't you buying a house? Like you're a financial advisor. Like what are you doing? It's such a horrible financial decision. But like so I'm in my 20s, like work a ton, and the amount of time that I don't have to think about like dealing with, what did you say went out yesterday? The boiler or something like.
Yeah, the boiler, the rocks, the white rocks.
I have 1,000 square foot apartment, and it's me and my dog. And so like my biggest concern is like vacuuming the dog hair off the floor, which takes 5 minutes.
I'm getting a call from the neighbor. This is last year about the weeds.
Yeah.
So then I have to hire a weed person to pull the weeds. As I'm getting calls from the neighbor about the weeds, I'm getting a call from the weed person about the weeds. And it's just like, it's a lot to manage.
So right? I think like especially while you're like building a career, you want to focus on other things and you're low on time. Like it frees up so much time. So you just don't have to worry about it. There's so much flexibility. So yeah, that they probably can't even put a dollar amount on that.
I've heard a quote, honestly, like, and this is hit like hard for me personally. What you own ends up owning you.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Think about that for a second. What you own ends up owning you. And this is so true from every perspective. From a house, it consumes your mind. I got to fix this. I got to do this. I'm not happy with this. My neighbor did this. I got to keep up with this. Car, you own it. One scratch, you're like, mentally, you're like, oh.
Business.
Everything, right? But if you think about when you lease a car, if it gets dinged, who cares? If you rent your apartment and something, like, who cares, right? So it's just mentally freeing, honestly, to rent. And there's both sides of this because also like owning physical assets, some people don't like the stock market because it goes up and down. It's very peace of mind. I own this tangible asset. But there's two sides of it. I think you have to figure out who you are, and I don't think there's a right answer. And that's not the goal of our podcast, is to prove one way is the other. Our job here is to provide the framework into making good decision-making within boundaries of your specific financial plan. If you're going to rent, great. Here's what to think about. If you're going to own, great. Here's all the aspects to think about. And that's our job here, is to clear the misconception that it's not one or the other. It's whatever one is best for you. And once you decide that, then make sure it works for your specific life and your plan.
And most like purchases like this are long-term decisions. Like you're not just buying a house and selling it a year. Like buying a car, anything, it's a long-term decision that you have to it's like a stock decision almost.
Yep.
So those are huge things to consider. I think that people don't think about them. They can just offload a house really quickly, which you can, but yeah, buying versus renting anything, it's similar things. So you want to dive into, we had a couple of other situations.
Let's talk about cars. Let's talk about boats. Let's talk about vacation homes. Let's just hit these quickly. So cars in general, we actually did a video on this. So you can look at this up on our website, ewa-llc.com. Leasing versus buying a car. Generally speaking, most Americans actually who own a car own it for just around 3 years. So if you just look at the math, like if you buy a new car, it depreciates off the lot, then you sell it in 3 years. Sure, you have some equity, but the payment you could have on a lease for those 3 years would be much less. You could invest that money and be way ahead of that car in the first 3 years. So buying, now this is math. So we found if you own a car and you're willing to drive it for depends on the type of car, like Tesla, Honda, they all kind of map out differently. But generally speaking, if you're able to own it for more than 5 years, then that's a no-brainer to always buy, as long as you're willing to keep that same car for more than 5 years, including maintenance and all that kind of stuff. We did tons of nerdy math behind this. If you're going to own a car for less than 3.9 years, you should always lease it. Now, there's a purgatory, kind of the difference between that 3.9 to 5, because there's different kind of cars that lease better, that own better. Mm-hmm. But in general, for any kind of car, if you're going to own it for more, if you're going to drive it and you're willing to keep that for more than 5 years, own it. Mm-hmm. Or if you're a business owner, have some tax benefits, own it. But also, if you're a business owner, you can deduct the lease payment. So there's tax benefits to both sides. But in generally speaking, there's way too much time gets put into car purchases. It's just something it's going to get you from point A to point B, in my opinion. And my second opinion is if you're a married household, generally speaking, own one and lease one, and have both options. Because psychologically, it is nice to have a new car every couple of years, and that allows you to keep switching it up, confined with the mileage limits, et cetera.
Yeah. If you're married with kids and you have one that you own that, you might have little kids that are going to beat the car up, and then you have the one that's leasing, or I guess vice versa. Maybe you don't care about the lease, but anyway, you get the new car that you could drive on trips or do, things that you don't have to.
Absolutely. And some other tips around leasing, is definitely negotiate buying or leasing. It's been harder over the last 2 years with the COVID and the supply and demand, but back in the day, man, we could negotiate.
Oh, that's
crazy.
Yeah.
But there's insurance you can buy up front. So the lease, you can return it with up to, I think the one I did on I drove a Lincoln MXC or something like that 5 or 6 years ago, and I bought insurance up front. It was a couple I want to say it was under $1,000, but then it was basically if you return the car with $7,000 worth of damage, which I knew 100% was going to happen with 2 golden retrievers, and then you don't owe us anything. So that was key, because it got scratched, it got dinged. So if you are going to lease, buy that upfront insurance, so you have the peace of mind, you can beat it up and turn it in without owing anything. That makes sense. Okay, let's talk about boats. So in general, this is one that high maintenance. We've seen a lot of clients buy a boat and then they use it once a year.
Oh yeah.
So if that's the case, definitely rent it. I'm actually a member at something called Freedom Boat Club. Any location you can go out, you pay $350 a month, and then when you go out, you can take it out literally anytime, unlimited amount of times, and you just pay gas, which is pretty cool. So I don't have to worry about docking it, I don't have to worry about maintaining it, I don't have to worry about anything. You've been on it with me. It's a little bit sketchy because I've only.
You don't know how to drive the boat, but
park the boat. I know how to drive the boat. I know parking the boat. I nailed it last time, but there's been some iffy. Some scary times.
Did you have to get a boating license?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It was tough. It was tough. I did it in one day, though.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been some questionable times.
Anyways, I rent. If you're boating every weekend, I would own a boat.
And
it makes
with
sense.
That thing you have, you can use it around the world, right? So you could be in Europe, and
absolutely.
Which is cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So that's just my take on it. It gets similar to renting. It's not something I'm passionate about. It's an option to have. We do team meetings on there every once in a while. It's pretty cool. But just in general, if you're going to boat, make sure your use has to be high enough to justify the cost. Because even if you're going to rent a boat for $500 or $1,000 for the day, and you do that twice a year, that is much
yeah.
better than going and buying a boat.
Same thing with the house, the maintenance, the upkeep that people
Absolutely.
don't think about. There's hidden costs.
Yeah, but there's a break-even point, and the reason I'm not going to give general advice on this podcast, it depends on the price point of the boat. If you are like an avid boater out there once a week, then yeah, buy the boat.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a break-even point where if you're going to even probably under 10 times a year, you should be renting it, not buying it.
Okay. Next one, vacation house.
Yeah, so vacation house, I think it's really, obviously you want to make sure the financial plan can support it. If the financial plan supports it, again, this is a lifestyle decision. If it's something, so I hear sometimes people say, oh, the reason I want to buy a vacation house is convenience. I can store my stuff there, and there's other reasons like that. The reasons why the people that buy the vacation homes often regret it is we're bored. We don't like going back to the same place. We also seen that as a reason to buy a vacation home is to create memories, consistency, etc. But there are some reasons where, if it's just consistency, like having your stuff in one place, like literally go buy a new wardrobe, buy a suitcase, and just every time you travel, keep it there. Let's say all in, you're under 10 grand. Like that's a much better financial decision than saying, oh, I have my clothes and stuff there at a place. Because we've literally had some people say that to us, Rick. But this is a very personalized decision. It's definitely not a financial choice unless you're going to like Airbnb it and rent it out. Then it can become a great financial choice depending on how good the area is, because then you can actually profit from it. But then, again, the con of that is like, oh, you go there and it's like 50 people have been there and touching all your stuff. And yours. So, yeah.
I would say the one thing that from clients that have bought or not bought vacation houses is if you're still working, to be in a position to afford a vacation house, you're probably pretty busy, successful professional. And so you buy this vacation house, it's a struggle to get there enough. You may only go once or twice a year. And then it's like, well, we take these 2 week-long trips a year, but now we're not traveling to see anywhere else in the world because we feel obligated to go to this house that we own.
Yeah.
And it can be a different scenario if you're retired. A lot of advice that we've given, and again, this is from hearing this from a lot of different clients, is beginning years in retirement, travel, don't buy the house. Maybe when you're in like your 70s and you start to slow down a little bit. I'm not saying you can't be healthy and active when you're in your 70s. You absolutely can. But when you've done all of the traveling around the world, maybe then look to buy the vacation house where you're going to spend more time there and consistently go to
That's great advice, James. Yeah, that's great advice. And the other thing too, like if you're a busy professional and you have a home here and then a home somewhere else, now you have to deal with 2 people with the weeds and 2 people
Imagine
with
having 2 boilers.
2 weed people, 2 boiler. Yeah, it sounds like a nightmare. But anyways, to each their own. So, okay, that was number 1, buying versus renting. Yeah. Number 2 is the misconception is I need to have my money spread out between advisors because I want to bounce ideas off of each other. I want to see who performs better. I feel safer if it's spread out. So let's talk through that.
Yeah. The first thing, let's look at fees. So if you're an AUM-based advisor, which a lot of advisors are, it's a tiered fee schedule, which works inverse of tax brackets. So our fee schedule, for example, the first $500,000 is 1.4%. The next $500,000 is 1%, and then it drops to 0.8. So if you have, I did the math before this, if you have $3 million account, $3 million portfolio, and you have that with one advisor, you're going to hit break points in the fee schedule. That comes up to about $28,000 a year with our fee schedule. If we're, the most we would charge, I guess, per se. If that was spread out over 3 advisors, you're going to pay, if you're, again, just using our fee schedule, for example, that $1 million hitting the highest fee brackets is going to be $12,000 at each advisor. So that's an extra $6,000 a year in fees.
I think it's $8,000 a year. 28 versus 36.
Sorry, yeah, $8,000 a year in fees that you're paying just for having your stuff spread out. So maybe the advice is that good that it's worth the extra $8,000. But generally, what we see, it just like if you, okay, so you're getting surgery on your hip, whatever.
FAI.
How many doctors did you consult for that?
Just a bunch in Pittsburgh before.
Did they all give you different opinions?
15 years ago, yeah. And then they didn't know. And then luckily I got the head doctor at Duke I got connected with, and he knew that Philip out in Vail, who's like the best in my opinion. And so he did my right hip, worked great. That was in 2008, and now fast forward 2023, and we're doing that was a long time ago, 15 years. Yeah.
So anyway, but you got like probably 10
millions
different
of
opinions.
You can't do anything. You need a hip replacement. And literally, he was able to arthroscopically go in, no replacement, no anything. Very regimented therapy for like 6 months after, but now I feel great.
Yeah. So same thing with an advisor. You could ask 3 different advisors. They're probably going to give you 3 different opinions on something. There's going to be all close to the same thing, but there's probably going to be little nuances in all of them. And so you're just going to create such, from what we've seen, a headache. A lot of times egos get in the way because every advisor wants to manage all the money. And so this guy's like not taking any advice from the other person. It just can become
chaos. Yeah. If you've got
chaos.
more than one financial advisor, it's just chaos. And the reason it's chaos is not only from a fee perspective, but it's also, if you look at your time, like the number one thing an advisor should do is save you time. If you have multiple advisors, they're all going to be trying to meet with you, compete with each other, and they're just going to waste your time, not save your time. Now you're paying higher fees, you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
When the sole job of an advisor and the team is to quarterback everything for you and to save your time, not waste your time.
You have multiple meetings throughout the year. Yeah. But then the other thing, let's just talk about taxes, is like one advisor could be doing a Roth conversion. The other advisor could be realizing gains in your non-qualified account, and they're not talking to each other. Maybe you're retired and now you're paying a Medicare surcharge just for.
Yeah, and you're saying we're converting up to the 24% bracket because he realized a huge gain in his Tesla stock over here.
Yeah.
Now the whole Roth conversion is done at 35, and now you're just wasting money. Yeah. So that's a one, and I have many examples of this. That's why we have a general philosophy. Now we have a very few clients who have one other advisor, very few, but in general we don't work with somebody unless everything's consolidated with us. And our advice is it doesn't have to be us. You should go find one team that you trust to quarterback everything. It does not have to be us, but that is the best interest of you and your family for your time, for coordination, for taxes, for fees, everything, all the above. And one example, the prior broker dealer, we did a client that, he gave us a part of the pie. And I was like in my 3rd or 4th year in the business. I was like, okay, it's a good account. I'm going to take this. And what happened is there's always comparison. And we beat the returns like by double the first couple of years. They still didn't move the rest of the money over. And then there was always like our whole meeting was basically asking us for advice on what the other advisor had given. Then we would give advice, and then he'd implement it with the other advisor because Roth conversions, we only had non-qualified money. So it was just, honestly, it was high stress for me, and it was bad for the client. He got good advice and he got a much better financial plan as a result, but ultimately we had to let him go because the time we were doing the job of like
the other
3 clients, because he also had a CPA that was very opinionated, and it was wasting our team's time as well. And I didn't think it was good for him because he was paying higher fees than he had to. And anyway, so real life examples of misconception. I need to have my money spread out between multiple advisors, and that's just, we see that as the opposite. And also with custodians, like I didn't have my money. We see a lot of people like have 20 different accounts because they just feel like it's safe. If you have a reputable custodian like FIN-LYT or Charles Schwab, they have insurances, cash up to like literally above SPIC limits of 500,000. They have insurance above that of 1.9 million. So if that company goes under, you're safe. You're totally safe. And then from a securities perspective, like FIN-LYT has up to $1 billion per customer that's protected. So just not the case. And the more accounts you have and the more spread out it is, the more likely something's going to happen, or identity theft, or you're just going to lose track of it. But if it's all in one place, you can spot check it, weekly, monthly, and make sure everything's safe and save your time as well. So not only from an advisor perspective, I also recommend, if you can, get everything under one custodian. Most people think that's not safe. That is actually the safest thing you can do, assuming that you're under those insurance limits between cash and investments, etc. Okay, let's go to number 3. Number 3 is, and this is a big one, a lot of TV personalities, believe in, you can self-insure, like buy term. So we're talking about like risk management here. So buy term insurance, invest the difference. And we have a lot of clients that do this. I own a ton of term insurance myself. I also own, permanent insurance as well, whole life insurance for many reasons. But basically the misconception is what?
Do you want to go buy term, invest the difference specifically?
Yep.
So that's good advice for most people. we're talking about high income earners, high net worth individuals. Most of the population should buy term and invest the difference.
For sure.
But high income earners, let's just say
Real quick with a misconception, even with the general population. So let's talk about the middle class. Let's talk about, families that are dependent on a breadwinner. A lot of advice we see from TV personalities is buy a 20-year policy. Let's say you're your age, so you're 27. You buy a 20-year
26.
policy, 26. You buy a 20-year policy. At 46, that thing's ending. At 46, you now have to get a new health exam, a new approval, and who knows what's happened to your health. You may never get approved again for insurance. The question then is, have you been disciplined by 46 to accumulate enough of a net worth where if God forbid you die, your family, your kids, everything's settled? Statistically, like 99% of the time, no. The median net worth at age 65 is under $300,000 in America.
Yeah.
So people just do not invest the difference. So I'm not saying like the middle class should go buy whole life insurance. They shouldn't. The common misconception is, go buy term insurance, invest the difference. Like, first, you have to invest the difference.
most people don't.
Most people don't. Secondly, you have to buy a term insurance program that is layered. Maybe your insurance needs going to go down in 20 years, so get half of it in 20 years. It's certainly not going to be zero for most people. So then also layer a 30-year policy or one that lasts till 65 in there as well.
Yeah.
And then be disciplined, work with an advisor, because most people just statistically do not self-insure. It's a pipe dream, and you can't follow these TV personalities, assume you're going to get 12% returns. You're not. Most people invest in the market. They make mistakes. The average investor gets under 4% a year. There's many studies that prove that. With a good advisor, if you do it yourself and you stay in and follow the right principles of investments, asset allocation, diversify, stay in long term, we're comfortable assuming 7, even 8%. Most of our plans we assume under that just to be conservative.
Yeah.
So now, with that being said, what about high income earners?
So, yeah, whole life can be a good alternative. A good place for them to store money. But you want to talk about like self-insuring?
Yeah, even for a high income earner, let's talk about self-insuring. Do you see that happen in 20 years? If you're making $1 million a year and someone's 35, do you see them being self-insured at 55?
No, because let's think about this. So if you're making $1 million a year and you have, let's say you're 35 and a couple kids, maybe spouse doesn't work, which is common, you probably need $5 million at least of term insurance. Mm-hmm. And that's going to cover, probably $1 million mortgage. You want to put send the kids to college. That's probably $1 million right there. Plus, there's income that would need replaced if the spouse isn't, if you die and your spouse isn't working, they need income. So not only would, that $5 million would cover that, but then that's just going to get them to age 65, and you probably need another $5 million at age 65 to be financially independent. So you would basically need $10 million, right, in that scenario to cover financial independence and lifestyle for the next 30 years. So
yeah, it's happening if you die. So the reality is, like, if you think about your life insurance need, it's a life acronym, right? It's liabilities, typically a mortgage. Federal school loans are forgiven if you die. It's typically income replacement, for your spouse or kids, and then it's education. Or the final expenses, F, and then education costs for your kids if you plan on doing private school or college. So in 20 years, will your life insurance need be less? Yeah, absolutely. Your mortgage will be less 20 years in. Your college costs potentially are now paid for and gone. So then we're just talking about income replacement. Have you done a good enough job saving if you pass 55 where you don't need life insurance? And the answer, whether you're making $100,000 a year, $1 million a year, what we've seen is majority of the time, unless you've inherited a bunch or sold a business, the answer is absolutely not. Then the question is, what's best? Should you layer term insurance, 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, like we described, or does some permanent insurance make sense as safe dollars, which can also be accessible in retirement, et cetera? But just and I'm not saying one is better than the other. This is highly personalized. I think a good financial plan, you can buy term and invest the difference. But the general advice in there is get a 20-year term policy and start saving is irrational.
Yeah.
But also saying, I'm going to put all my money in whole life insurance and not going to invest in the market and get my 401k match Roth, that is irrational as well.
Yeah.
You need to have a good, well thought out plan, a disciplined plan. For the majority of people, it's going to be mostly layered term life insurance, 10, 20, 30-year policies. And then if you're a high net worth income earner over $500,000 or more, then whole life insurance can make sense as a safe asset, tax efficient, asset protected, etc., and also serve as that gap approaching retirement and then also throughout retirement, because most likely your lifestyle needs will be much, much higher as well.
Bottom line is misconception is people don't have the discipline to invest the difference.
And there's no, just like renting or buying, it's very individualized, very specific to, what type of term, how long, what type of insurance you have, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, okay. So what's the fourth misconception is around retirement and tax brackets. So talk to us about how would you, if you were to say a statement, Jamison, what's the misconception here?
I will be in a lower tax bracket once I retire.
Therefore, I'm in a fund pre-tax dollars right now.
Because I'm in the highest tax bracket.
Absolutely. So we did a whole podcast on this. I think it was episode number 2.
Maybe.
Yeah, episode number 2. Why Roth makes sense or CPA's worst nightmare. So talk to us why this just isn't the case especially for, first of all, if you're a low income earner, let's say under a 24% tax bracket, you should be funding a Roth because that's you're getting the money in, you're paying taxes low now, and then it's tax free forever. Who knows what happens in the future? But let's talk about high income earners.
So let's say you're making $1 million a year now. You're in 37% tax bracket. It's like, okay, I should deduct my 401k contribution. And then when I get to retirement, my lifestyle is only $15,000 a month, $300,000 a year. I need less money. That 300,000 is less than $1 million. I'm going to be a lower tax bracket. But if we were to project out what income looks like in retirement, let's say Social Security, today's dollars would be like $60,000 a year with
between two spouses. Let's say
two spouses, let's say, and cost of living adjustment would be higher down the road. Let's say $60,000 a year in today's dollars. A lot of times that you don't fully, early years in retirement, you don't fully retire. So maybe there's some part-time work. We'll just say there's not. If you're a high income earner, you've accumulated a lot of your money in non-qualified assets. So any capital gains or non-qualified dividends show up as income on your tax return.
So you have a $100,000 gain. It's a 15% tax on that, but that 100 still shows up as part of your income, figuring out what your marginal tax brackets are.
Yeah. So you probably have 50, what we've seen of somebody that's high net worth with a huge big non-qualified account. Maybe there's 50,000 a year in dividends that's getting added onto the income. Any type of private equity, other alternate investments that could show up. And then, so that alone right there could be a couple $100,000 of income just from stuff that's getting added onto your tax return that you're not even taking as a distribution. But the biggest thing is retirement distributions. So you may say, okay, I'm going to retire at 65. I have Social Security. Maybe I'm working part-time. Maybe I have a pension. And that's going to give me a couple $100,000 a year. I'm good. I don't need to take any money. If I need to take any money, I'll take it from my non-qualified account. I'm not paying taxes. Well, you've accumulated a couple $1 million inside of a pre-tax IRA, and that's great while you're in your 60s and you're not taking any distributions, and then that money's going to continue to grow. And when you're 73, the government says you have to start taking a portion of this out, whether you need the money or not. And so that requirement of distribution now gets tacked on as income, and you're just going to get crushed that's going to immediately bump you up into high tax brackets, even if you're not spending the money. So that's the first thing, is people really have no idea how much income is actually going to show up on their tax return in retirement. Anything to add on that? Then we can talk about
and if you're saving 37, and most likely in that example, you're going to be, right back out in your pre-tax accounts. A lot of it will be coming out at 32. So it's 5% difference worth gambling on tax rate code changes 30 years from now, Medicare rates, sequence of returns. And there's so many details. We could spend hours just talking about the benefits of having control in the Roth. But then literally, if you're a high income earner as well, if you put in, $30,000 to a pre-tax account and you save $10,000, let's just say, to keep the math simple, in taxes, versus put in a Roth and then it compounds, is that the peace of mind you're going to have on a Roth, not being taxed later, not having required distributions, assuming you roll it to a Roth IRA at retirement, to not being subject to sequence of return risk, that not showing up as part of your MAGI, modified adjusted gross income, which is how your Medicare rates get calculated, etc. All of those peace of minds, all of those actual logical statistical evidence, really you should have a balanced approach in how you save money, what's going to be taxed now versus what's going to be taxed later. I'm not saying put everything in a Roth. It shouldn't be hey, get every tax deduction I possibly can right now, that will cause problems later.
Yeah. One practical example that does go along with the misconception is like we have had people that are, let's say they're 60 and they are in their high income year, maybe that's their like peak income earning, and they're going to retire in the next couple of years. And if they have done proper Roth planning beforehand, yeah, maybe we do take the deduction because like literally they're making $1 million a year now, and we know in 3 years their income, because the right planning was done, is only going to be $200,000. So there is a couple use cases for this, but I would say in general, you know, most of the time, don't think you're going to be in a lower tax bracket.
Absolutely. Okay, so that leads us to number 5. So number 5 is misconception, is the thinking or the thought process of the more money I have means the more happy I will be. So let's break this down. Why is this simply not true? Give us some background on money is important for basic needs and to provide and for opportunities, but there's a certain cutoff point where there's diminishing returns, and effectively at certain points where it may actually make you less happy.
Yeah. So this is called I've heard this, but I didn't know this was the name of it until I was doing some research. The Easterlin paradox. It was some economist in the 70s that came up with this. And basically, money improves quality of life to cover basic human needs, which today that's estimated to be like $80,000 a year, meaning that you have like you're sheltered, you're eating, you have health care, like your basic stuff. That person that makes $80,000 a year and covering that, yes, they have a higher quality of life. They're more happier than somebody making $20,000 a year and is struggling to do those things. So that's kind of like not really debatable. But what the misconception is as income goes up, that happiness gets higher, quality of life gets higher. And so what this study or this guy had come up with was that as income goes up, you basically get on the hedonic treadmill of like wanting to compete with other people, wanting to compete with your neighbors, your coworkers, because humans are naturally very tribal and you want to fit in, you want to get approval. If we were to think like life 10,000 years ago, you had to fit into a tribe to survive. If you got kicked out of the tribe, there's like a really high probability that you're going to get killed because you didn't have that community of people around you. So what it basically ends up happening is you get on this hedonic treadmill and there's a plateau of happiness because you always want the bigger house, you want the bigger car. Nothing's ever enough, which ends up, like you said, law of diminishing returns leads to being less happy. And happiness is also like very subjective, means different things to different people. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
No, that's so true. I've experienced that personally. And the other, it's kind of like using the excuse of like, once I do this, life's going to get easier. Like once I graduate high school, it's going to be easier. Once I graduate college, it's going to be easier. Once I get my first job, it's going to be, once I pay off my student loans, once I buy my first house, once I get married, once I have my first kid. And the reality is life gets harder and harder and harder. So it's not about a certain milestone and then it's like life is fixed. It's learning how to handle adversity, learning that you can get through hard much better the more experience you have. And the money, it's the same thing. It's not just accumulating for the sake of accumulating, thinking you're going to fix a problem. Money actually puts a microscope on your problems. It doesn't fix them. It will put them under scrutiny, and it'll oftentimes cause a lot of issues and a lot of problems if they're not prior addressed. So completely agree. We've seen that in clients. We have some of the happiest clients that are high net worth, but they have figured out a value system that they live by, and the money supports that value system. And then we also have some clients that we're helping that they have a high net worth and they're not happy, and it's figuring out, well, how do we reverse this? How do we make sure your money, instead of just accumulating it for the sake of accumulating it, how do we get it to support you, your family, your kids, generations, and make sure it's just a support system and a reversal system? Because the reality is there's no one specific milestone that's going to make you happy, and money is certainly a small part of the happiness equation. But relationships, peace of mind, gratitude, purpose in life, there are so many more important things that are part of the happiness equation, and money is just like a check mark. And if more money is going to help magnify those other things in a good way, great. But if it's going to take away from those things, so now you don't have the time to focus on your purpose in life, passions in work, out of work, family, etc., then it can definitely become a paradox very quickly.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was called that either. Thanks for doing the research.
Yeah, I've heard about that study. I read it in a couple of books, but then
Yeah, Scott Galloway talks about that
Yeah.
in his book. Highly recommend. It's a great book, Algebra of Happiness. You actually got me onto that one, I don't know, 5 years ago. But yeah, really, really good book. Highly recommend that. He talks about this specific paradox in there. Algebra of Happiness, how, money is part of it, but it's not the end all be all. So, all right, well, hope you enjoyed this podcast. And if you haven't already, please hit the follow button and rate the podcast. That's how we can get a broader reach and impact more people. One of our main purposes of life is impacting others and spreading financial literacy for all those across the United States. Thanks for joining. Thanks for tuning in to our podcast. Hopefully you found this helpful. Really hope this is as beneficial and impactful to as many people across the nation as possible. So hit the follow button. Make sure to rate the podcast, and please share with any friends or family members that would also find this beneficial. Thank you very much.